good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, we're going to be talking about boundaries. We're going to be talking about relationships, love, marriage. You know, many of us are in relationships right now where we feel like we're losing ourselves. We might not even understand where we are, and we might be kind of unhappy and even feeling trapped to some degree, not only physically, but also emotionally. Joining me live in studio, Nancy Levin. Nancy is a master coach, a best-selling author. She has her own radio talk show. She's written several books, and she's here live on Live Your True Life Perspectives to discuss the permission to put yourself first and what that means. Nancy, so great to have you on Live Your True Life.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
It's going to be great. We're going to talk about some stuff that some people are going to be like, what's that? And other people are going to be like, I went through this.
And some people might be like, I'm afraid of that.
Exactly. What's a boundary? You know, it's interesting. It's funny about boundaries, and we'll get into that in a little while. But, you know, I thought it was interesting when we were talking earlier. You were talking about the concept of the permission to put yourself first. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah. You know, what I find primarily happens, especially for those of us who are identifying as people pleasers or peacekeepers, people who don't want to rock the boat, people who really are invested in harmony at any cost. What happens is when we're doing whatever it takes a high toll on us. And we are in this place of really abandoning ourselves for the sake of someone else. And so this idea of making ourselves a priority is a completely new concept. And so this idea of permission to put myself first, to me, is a critical pillar in being able to own and integrate and acknowledge that I have wants, I have needs, I have desires, and I want to learn how to start living life on my own terms. Because so many of us are inhabiting someone else's life. We're living someone else's life. And so I'm really sort of I'm on the bandwagon to you know, it's not enough just to bring yourself into the conversation, but I'm really wanting you to take yourself into account before you take others into account. And so that's why a little earlier when I said, like, some people are going to think this sounds a little scary, because this, for many, can be a completely contradictory idea from what we've grown up with.
You're so right. You know, it's interesting. I talk a lot of times about the family dynamic, Nancy, and how, you know, with our parents, the way that our parents raised us, the way that our relationship was with mom or dad. Yep. And how that directly reflects and directly correlates to the relationship we have with our husband, our wife, our significant other, and also who we choose. Yeah. And the things we choose to do and not to do, because, you know, I was raised in a good home, but, you know, there were issues. But it's interesting when you look at stuff, and I remember, like, the men that I would pick when I was, like, 17, 18, 19, or I guess the boys I would pick, always an interesting dynamic, and I didn't realize until I really opened my eyes and began, you know, attending my classes, you know, with regards to psychology, to understand why I was picking this. And then I realized, oh, it's kind of based on the premise of dealing with my father. Yeah. Very interesting stuff, especially when we're in codependent dynamics with our parents, and then later on we meet somebody and we find ourselves in that same cycle again.
Yeah, I mean, I often think that relationship is one long continuum in our lives, and it's like a revolving door across from us. And it will start with our parents, and then it can go to intimate partners, it can go to siblings, it can go to bosses, it can go to friends, because we are the common denominator in all of our relationships. And we're going to essentially orchestrate, and not consciously, but we're going to orchestrate the context for us to learn the lessons that we need to learn around healing these particular patterns. And, I do believe, and it's a little woo-woo, but I do believe that, we come into this lifetime with a certain, with something specific that we're here to learn, or a certain curriculum, so to speak. And so I do believe, like I was saying, we're orchestrating the circumstances, the situations, the relationships that are going to help us learn what we came here to learn.
I totally agree with you. And, even working with clients, I talk about the same thing because I think a lot of times we feel almost like the victim, like, why is this happening to me?
Right.
And why is this happening again to me? And, you're so right about bosses and everybody, because what happens is it's like this cycle, and it's like if we don't learn it here, then we're given this lesson over here to learn. And then if we don't figure it out there, then we're given it again. And I had a client recently in my office that's dealing with the same dynamic with mom and dad, is married to a very similar situation, boss, very similar situation. And they're having problems sticking up for themselves. They're having problems asserting themselves. And every one of these relationships, they feel like the odd man out. They feel like the person that just has to be quiet, and everybody else is telling them what to do, and their thoughts and their needs don't matter. And they feel like that across the board. And they almost feel silenced because they've done this for so long.
Exactly. And so, we there's a couple of things that I see that happen. First of all, as we're repeating these patterns, I often think about it like sort of the upward spiral of a video game, and not like I'm some big gamer, but it's that, as you win the video game, what do you win? You win the advanced level of the video game.
That's true.
So, yeah. So it's like, we can start to heal or start to deal with, what's happening in our patterns. And as we get a bit of a leg up, we're still going to be presented with circumstances and situations that are going to test us, that are really here to help us assess what's happening and to help us grow.
I totally agree with you. It's like once we learn, and it's funny because I found that in my personal life, when you said that the one common denominator is yourself, I was engaged several times, gave back every single ring, and the last time I was engaged, I walked out, gave back the ring, and I said, hey, the one thing that's happening in all my relationships, the one thing that's consistent and constant is me.
Right.
And I'm not happy with where these relationships are all heading. And I didn't want to marry into that. I mean, God bless, any of those folks that might be listening, but I love them. But that particular marriage is not what I wanted in this lifetime. And I took a year off, and some of my clients, they gasp, you took a year off from dating and sex to figure this stuff out. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I moved in. I worked every day. I showed up at the office to do what I had to do. But when I came home, I really focused on myself because I realized that I was living a pattern. I was in a cycle, and the cycle was holding me back from growing, and it was keeping me stagnant, and it was keeping me away from the lesson I had to learn. And the lesson was tough, and the lesson was based on codependency. I was codependent. I wanted to be in a relationship no matter how painful it was. And many of you out there right now listening to Nancy and I are starting to like, oh, they're preaching to the choir, because some of you are in relationships that you are very unhappy with. And the only reason you're there is because you do not want to be alone. You do not want to deal with this stuff. But I found out that I had to deal with me right then and there, because if I didn't deal with me, I wasn't going to be, one, I wasn't going to learn the lesson, and two, I wasn't going to be very happy. And I was going to have a lot of regret down the road.
Yeah, because really, ultimately, relationship is not meant to save us. It's meant to grow us. And it is, first and foremost, the place where we have to learn how to love ourselves first. And so I love what you're sharing. I did a very similar thing post-divorce before I got in a relationship, of really being like, I am done. I am swearing off this. I'm going to deal with me. I'm going to connect my own dots. I'm going to put myself back together, see what's what here, and see what I actually want instead of just falling into something. but really being able to be the driver and the navigator. And that's when we're able to start changing the groove of our patterns, when we're able to really have preferences, know what we want, have desire, and take ourselves in that direction. Because the bottom line is, I'm going to be in a relationship with myself the longest. That's really the love affair of my life, is the relationship between me and me. And once I really got clear on that, everything else began to make a lot more sense.
Very powerful. When we return, we'll be talking more about that special relationship with ourselves, the one that we're really supposed to figure out in this lifetime. We'll be talking more about how to really work on the relationships we currently have, and later on, how to create boundaries and what they are. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back in. You know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
I'm ready to fly. Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, we're talking about relationships. Better yet, the permission to put yourself first. And joining me live in studio, Nancy Levin, master coach, best-selling author. She's got a ton of books out, and she also is a radio show host as well. Nancy, I'm so glad to have you on the show. Right before the break, we were talking about, being in these relationships and figuring out, first off, that the most important relationship we have is with ourselves, and how to make that a reality, because I think a lot of us don't realize the importance of that or don't understand that, because we jump into a relationship and then we lose ourselves.
Yeah, we jump into a relationship, and what we start doing is, and this is really the codependent dance, we start bobbing and weaving and walking on eggshells, and we start living this from this place of being other reference. We're taking someone else's temperature and then deciding how we feel. We're checking someone else's weather and then seeing what's going on with us. And so to me, the invitation here is to actually be able to come home to ourselves and get anchored in ourselves first. And again, this is something that feels very counterintuitive, especially for those of us who are in that space of wanting to rescue or save or fix another. Those of us who've been people-pleasing, those of us who've bent over backwards to try to take away someone else's pain. We have gone to great measures to make sure that the other person is okay. But what happens when we're trying to make sure that the other person is okay, we end up taking the hit. And the problem is that over time, we're so used to taking the hit that we disappear. So part of the reappearing is coming back into that sense of self, really being able to connect with, what do I want? And that is a really tough question for thousands of people I coach. That is a really tough question to answer. What do I want? And I can't tell you the number of times that I'll ask a client that, what do you want? And he or she will start answering with what his or her mother wants, his or her partner wants, his or her child wants. It's really hard to keep the attention on ourselves. And so I'm kind of on this bandwagon to reclaim selfishness. That selfishness is the antidote to that self-abandonment that we've been living with. And that selfish and self-care and self-love are essentially 3 sisters whose job it is to support us in honoring ourselves. So the invitation is to take ourselves into account first. What do I need? What do I want? What's the most self-loving action I can take today? What's the most self-honoring choice I can make today? And do that first. Put the attention on myself first before I put it on everybody else.
That's powerful. It's interesting you brought up the fact that, with your clients, one of the things that you ask is, what do I want? Or what do you want? And they don't know. And it's interesting because, that's hard, because we've been taught, most of us have been taught our whole life that, not to think about what you want, or what you want doesn't have value, or that's too selfish, or that's never going to happen. And it's interesting how you're right. We're looking at other people to make those decisions, or we're looking to, well, so-and-so wants this or they want that. But I also think that a lot of people don't even know what they truly want because they've never even explored who they are.
That's right.
And I think that's the clear, I think you and I are preaching to the choir on this. And I think that many of you listening are probably thinking, golly, that's like they're in my mind. But I don't think a lot of people, and I don't think a lot of really great people have ever really spent time getting to know what makes them tick.
Yep. And to me, that's part of this. Even in, the whole thing of permission to put yourself first is, who am I? What does make me tick? What do I enjoy? What turns me on? What lights me up? And what happens if it's just between me and not anybody else? What if it's not about external validation? What if it's not about the accolades? What if it's not about the applause and the approval? Because that's another piece I find loads in here quite often, is if it's just between me and me, if there's no criticism or no praise, what if I'm left to my own devices, what am I likely to do? How am I likely to spend my time? What's the lifestyle that resonates with me? And, I know that when I left my marriage, that was a big question I had to sit with, because I left a very controlling marriage where my now ex-husband was controlling of how I moved my body, what I ate, what I wore, all of it. And so when I was sitting alone in my own space after 18 years of this marriage to really ask myself, what do I want? What do I even want to eat? What do I even want to wear? How do I want to move my body? These were big questions. And they all rooted back into, it all goes back into the patterning we were talking about at the beginning. Being able to root back from myself into my early childhood, patterns with my mother specifically, patterns with my being with my brother who died when I was 2 years old. So then all the dots start connecting for me. And I got to realize how I became who I became, that I was able to tolerate and endure and sustain myself inside of the marriage, inside of really a cage of rage and control. And it was really from this place of, I was trying to heal a grief in my parents that couldn't be healed because they'd lost a son. I was trying to be more than just one child because they had lost a child. I wanted to take up more space. And so then sort of the not enoughness starts setting in. And then when I met my husband, it was as he was able to step into that role, because it was as if on the day we met, he introduced himself by saying, "Hi, I'm broken." And I said, "Great, I will fix you." And so it was the match of the core wounds made in heaven. And so I got to recreate the pattern of trying to heal, save, fix, rescue, all of it. And through that, I lost myself. I disappeared. I lost my voice. I lost my sense of self in trying to build him up. And so then once I was able to extract myself and be on my own, it was in that time and space that I had to be like, okay, here I am in my mid-40s, and I'm going to have to figure out who I am without all of that. And it's pretty much the most powerful, intentional work we can do while we're here, is to really know thyself.
And one of the things that I find interesting too is, I like what you were saying about, with the parents and trying to basically be the savior in that situation, and then turning around and then meeting your husband and then him needing saving again, and then you kind of walking into that. There's a lot of men that find themselves in the savior position, a lot of women. On the flip side, some people might find themselves in the victim drive, where, when they were a kid, they kind of was like everything was happening to them, and very much the same when they get married, they get in a relationship, they feel the same. And we take on these archetypes a victim or savior or what have you. But all this stuff is literally outside of ourselves, as you say, and it's like we're really not delving in to any of that. We're just trying to be what we think we should be or what we need to be to get the love and the acceptance. But what we're getting is conditional love.
That's right.
Because it's all based on conditions. What have you done for me yesterday?
Yep.
And what have you done for me today? Because, yesterday was yesterday. And then what happens is many of us, we jump through those hoops, whether it was grades or you trying to, be like a second child. And some of us had to be best friends to our parents, confidants, when you were really supposed to be a kid. And so it's all these different masks that we put on. And it's very interesting. So, if somebody's in a relationship right now, let's say they're in a situation, maybe they're married to maybe somebody they would consider maybe narcissistic. Maybe they're married to somebody with maybe a personality disorder. We don't know. But what would you begin to instruct somebody that's saying, hey, I'm really looking around and I'm realizing, this isn't my life and I'm not living my life. And if you can start off real quick and then we can get back into it when we come back on the air, but just a quick thing about what you might say to them just to begin to look at.
It's really less about the other person and being able to hold the mirror up to yourself and get truthful and get real.
When we return, we'll be talking more about that, more about what you can do right now if you found yourself in a situation like that, and some solutions. Because you know that Live Your True Life Perspectives is all about solutions. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back in. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. Joining me live in studio today, Nancy Levin. Nancy is a master coach, a best-selling author, and a radio talk show host herself. And right before the break, we were talking about, hey, if you found yourself in a marriage right now where you're overwhelmed, you feel like you're not you anymore, you don't even know who you are, we're talking about what you need to begin to analyze right now to find you. Nancy, right before the break, you were giving some amazing suggestions on what to do. And, let's continue that conversation because I feel there's a lot of folks listening to the show right now. They're in a marriage. They're in a long-term relationship. They feel like they don't know who they are anymore. They can't even identify themselves. What are some of the first things that needs to be done in this situation to kind of analyze the situation and understand what needs to be done by them?
Great. So I want to first take that from the angle of understanding that we all grow up with this belief that we need to hide certain parts of ourselves in order to be loved and accepted. So from a very early age, we start concocting a persona. And we begin packaging ourselves to be digestible to others. So what ends up happening is that there's this big pool of disowned qualities. And so anything that we decide that we are not, I'm not mean, I'm not lazy, I'm not selfish, I'm not irresponsible, whatever are the I'm not that, we are going to draw toward us people who exhibit those qualities that we've disowned. So in other words, anything that we can't be within ourselves, we are projecting out onto others. So there's this saying, there's one finger pointing out at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. So the first piece of this is to really get that it's not about the other person. It's really about seeing another person as a mirror reflecting back to me the parts of me that I've disowned. And the goal of the soul is to be whole. So the idea here is that relationship is really the place where we can return to wholeness by reclaiming these lost pieces of ourselves. So it's so easy to point the finger and blame the other person. It's so easy even to go into, he or she is a narcissist, whatever that might be. But we have to see that whatever quality we see in someone else exists within us. Now, when you mentioned narcissist earlier, I just said it. I want to be clear. I'm not talking about, the clinical DSM diagnosed version. I'm talking far more about the garden variety narcissist, which is what we tend to bandy about more than anything. But we have to understand that we all have these tendencies. We all have the same qualities. And so the thing is that the people closest to us are going to trigger us the most, bottom line. And it becomes the invitation. It becomes really the ninja move to use that as the way that I can find the way that narcissism presents in me, the way that lazy presents in me, irresponsible presents in me, mean presents in me. And it's tough for people because we get really caught up in behavior. When I was married to my ex-husband, he did not want to work. And to me, that was the dictionary definition of lazy. And I got to say, I'm not lazy because, quite frankly, I was a workaholic. But it's not about the behavior. I define my lazy. My lazy is that on a Tuesday afternoon, I'll lay on the sofa and watch 5 episodes back to back of my favorite show. That's my lazy. And I need to find the gift in my lazy. The gift in my lazy is that I get to relax, restore, recharge, laugh, cry, rest. So we have to stop pushing away these parts of ourselves and projecting them onto others, which we then take as sort of a righteous position to blame someone else for why we're unhappy. So that, to me, that's really the starting point. We have to take responsibility. We have to own and integrate these parts of ourselves that we've been pushing away, and we have to not make it about the other people in our lives.
I find it interesting, when we're talking about mirrors in our life and we're talking about mirrors when it comes to significant others and the folks that we're married to. Interesting, because I find that the mirror is always almost like a funhouse mirror. It's very exaggerated to some degree because we're looking at somebody and we can't really see that. There might be some sort of connection, but we look at them like they're so out of control or, there's, all these issues. And some of it, I do agree, you can really kind of wrap your arms around it and see that. Do you think there's some, though? Because like you were saying about, with your previous marriage, do you think that some marriages can obviously be salvaged? Do you think that some marriages are just not going to work? Because I know there's some people out there that are saying, well, I am trying to embrace that. I am trying not to judge that, but it's really causing a rift in our marriage. I mean, I'm not actually saying that this heals the marriage per se. And I do believe that there are relationships that are not meant to stay the course. I should say also, I believe that any relationship can work as long as the parties involved are willing to get into the cauldron together. But what I'm pointing to is that we're so quick. First of all, we're so quick to go into the should I stay or should I go, thinking that if I go, everything's going to be better. But what I want to say is that, and I know you know this, is that, if I leave a relationship and I don't do any healing work on myself, I'm going to recreate that relationship again and again and again and again. I agree with you. And I also, a step further, I mean, there's some folks out there, and I've seen some folks in therapy with it where they get divorced, and then before they don't ever work on themselves. Within a couple of months after the divorce is finalized and the ink has been dry, they're already with somebody else. And then there's another marriage, and I've been to those. I've been to those one. And the next thing you know, we're in it again, and it's 9 months to a year out. And they've been married, and they're like, "Well, I'm having the same problems." Well, it's like you never dealt with the stuff in the first relationship,
right? And so that's what I'm saying. to take the attention off of the other person and bring it here first what's the work I need to do here so that I'm not constantly in place of pointing a finger. Then I have freedom of choice. I don't have to like the other person's behavior. I don't have to agree. We can have differences, all of that. I'm free to choose. Do I want to stay or do I want to go? But if I go too soon because I've made it all about the other person, I'm missing out on a really valuable piece of healing work.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, and I think you're right. We are quick to judge. We are quick to jump out of the relationship without really understanding what's kind of right in front of our faces, and maybe the value as well. But, let me ask you, so if somebody's saying, hey, like you were saying, jumping in the cauldron, getting there together, what are some of those ways to really motivate, someone else to, want to cooperate, want to invest in the relationship? Or do we need to, look past that and say, hey, what can I do to really focus on myself first, and maybe that other person might follow kind of in my footsteps? I don't know.
I think it's twofold. I do subscribe to the, what can I do here to begin the process? And then I can invite the other person in. Maybe it is going to therapy together. Maybe it is, I've got a book and a coaching program, the New Relationship Blueprint. That's a great place to start too. What are the ways that we can come together and do this shoulder to shoulder instead of as opposing forces? And really always checking in with the other person around what they're available for and what they aren't. And to me, that then sort of leads into boundaries. What really being able to check in, like here are my needs. Here's what I want. Speak from the I. Here's what I want. Are you available for this? We learn a lot once we ask someone what they are available for or not. And then again, we have a choice. So if someone's clearly saying, I'm not willing to go to therapy, I'm not willing to read a book, I'm not willing to do anything different. If you want to fix this marriage, you fix it, something like that, then we know what we're working with.
That's true. When we return, we're talking more about solutions, things that you can do, because, some of these things we can really work on it. Some of it might be deal breakers, but in the process, getting to know ourselves is the most important thing, because otherwise, I know one thing, it leads to regret without doing it. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back in. We'll be back for this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck. Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Berges. On today's show, we've been talking about the permission to put yourself first. Nancy Levin has joined me here in studio. Nancy, master coach and best-selling author and radio talk show host. And right before the break, Nancy, we were talking about, solutions to these problems, and we began to talk about the power of boundaries and setting healthy boundaries. So let's start there.
Yeah, so I think that there's a really big misconception around boundaries. So I'm first going to say that I look at boundaries as being my limits around what I will or will not do, will or will not accept, and will or will not tolerate. And from there, I can, again, this is anchoring into me around the whole concept of permission to put myself first, looking at what are my limits. And from there, like we were saying before the break, I want to keep it on me so that I'm able to, when I'm setting a boundary, I'm able to say it from the place of what I need, and then asking what the other person is available for. I want to really, really stress something here, because this is something that I come across with pretty much across the board, every single person that I coach around boundaries. So it's inevitable that a client will say to me, I tried to set a boundary, but he or she just kept doing the thing. So this is probably the biggest myth around boundaries, the myth that someone else is crossing your boundary. And I'm going to just clearly state that it is you who are crossing your boundary, because it's not up to anyone else to uphold, honor, respect your boundary. It's up to you. So it's not enough to just simply set a boundary, but we have to be willing to hold it. And we have to be willing to honor it. We have to be willing. It's not so much about enforcing it as it is we have to honor the boundary that we're setting, and we have to keep coming back to, am I willing to do whatever it takes to protect myself, to honor myself?
Exactly.
As I'm setting it, yeah.
And it's about values. I mean, like, one of the things
Absolutely.
that I stress is, like, really each person needs to write down their values and their heart and their core beliefs and the things that they will and will not ever deal with. And you're right. It's not about the other person breaking the boundary or crossing the boundary. It's about, wait a second. I mean, basically when somebody's able to do that, we have actually let them do that.
That's right. That's right. And it's because we haven't stood in the honoring of ourselves. So, quite frankly, the question becomes, if I'm not willing to honor my boundary, why on earth would anybody else? And if I don't honor my boundary, if I set a boundary but don't hold it, then I'm the little girl who cried wolf. I'm teaching people that I'm not serious. I'm teaching people that they don't really need to take what I say seriously. So, we have to be willing, before we even set the boundary, we have to know what we're willing to do. So, if it's something about, it could even be, we could say this to our partner, let's say, I'm just letting you know that I feel uncomfortable when you have more than 2 drinks at dinner. So I'm just letting you know that I can first check in and say, are you willing that when we go out, are you willing to only have 2 drinks? And then the other person can say yes or no. But we can also then say, I'm just letting you know that if you make the choice to have more than 2 drinks when we're out to dinner together, I'm going to leave. In order to honor myself, I'm going to leave. But then we have to really put our money where our mouth is. We have to be willing to leave.
And that's what usually doesn't happen is,
that's right.
You said it, and then all of a sudden when you don't do it, then to me and to the other person goes, well, it didn't mean anything to them anyway.
Right. And what we end up doing is we forget we have some sort of amnesia about that. And we just go into I can't believe he or she had 4 drinks. Mm-hmm. We go into the blame and the victim, as opposed to the empowered place of, here's how this affects me. Here's what I'm going to do to take care of myself. And here's the action that needs to be taken now.
And there's a cause and effect. And
there's a cause and effect.
Instead of just crying wolf, instead of just, the drama. Because a lot of times it's all talk.
Right.
And you're right. Yeah. It's interesting because it becomes all talk. And once somebody's able to, to basically, well, they're not really doing anything to you. But once this happens, it's almost like your word then is questioned as well, because you're not standing behind what you said you were adamantly going to stand behind.
Right. Yep. So, to me, that's the most important piece in boundary setting is knowing my limits, being willing to state them, seeing what the other person is available for, and then what am I going to do to honor myself?
Let me ask you, Nancy, because we could talk for hours on this topic.
I know.
I mean, we could do. I'd love to have you back on the show, by the way. So I hope you'll come back on.
I would love to come back.
But there's more to go. I mean, we have so much more to talk about. But I want to, before I forget, where can my listeners find you? So if they want more information or to connect with you, where do they go?
My website is nancylevin.com. So all the info is there. And one thing that I'd love to offer is I've got a really great, fun quiz that I'm offering right now. And if you go to nancylevin.com/mindset, money quiz. So nancylevin.com/money quiz. It's actually about the intersection of self-worth and net worth. So how the way that you think about yourself impacts what you can create, have, and receive.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much for offering that. And, and lasting thoughts, because, one of the things that I really thought about when you were talking is it's the same with these boundaries is the same as having unconditional love. You can't expect somebody to unconditionally love you if you don't unconditionally love yourself. Lasting thought, Nancy, for our listeners today.
I believe that it all comes down to choice. I believe present moment choice predicts our future. So present moment choice is our crystal ball. So the choices we make today are going to impact the future that we live into. Every choice we make is either going to sabotage or be of service. So I just invite you to pay attention to your choices and have them be of service.
Powerful. And, for all y'all listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, it's about you. The most important relationship you can have is with yourself, because that's why we came in this body. That's why we showed up this way. We got to learn about ourselves, grow with ourselves, and love ourselves. Stay tuned. Another show coming up next. And Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Berges, will be back this time in 3 shakes.